Hi everyone, it's Tamara here with another card making tutorial. This time I'm using the image from the NeverEnding Story Falkor from Elvi Studio. I'll be doing some Copic colouring of the image and then doing some ink blending for a galaxy background plus like a rocky outcrop that he's sitting on. So let's get started. So I've already printed Falkor out on some Copic Express at cardstock and we'll be colouring him with our Copic markers shortly. But I also have cut out a piece of smooth white cardstock, just cut a little bit bigger than what we need for our background panel that will be ink blending. And I'll be using this Moutains die from La La Land Crafts. I actually kind of referenced a photo online of this scene, and I thought it'd be perfect trying to recreate that kind of rocky base that he's on, and also Falkor's colouring. So he's kind of like a beigey cream colour, but he's got this kind of glimmer down the back. So I'm going to be using some Nuvo Aqua Shimmer just to add that little bit of kind of shimmer on the background. And as that scene is set out of space, I've actually referenced some galaxy images. So I'm going to be trying to replicate that today just using my dome sponge applicators. And I'll be using Salvaged Pattina, Peacock feathers, broken china, chipped sapphire, and black soot for my background. So I'm kind of keeping a blue theme with that kind of dark black to finish that off. Now I've sped up the ink blending, but I am just kind of putting random spots of colour for all the different blues that I'm using. So just the lighter blues at first. So initially it's just the Salvaged Pattina, Peacock feathers and the broken china. So this is going to look a right mess to start off with, but before you know it, once we start kind of getting everything fully inked over the top, this will start to really shine as a galaxy background. So to fill in that kind of white space around those like little patches of blue that I did, I've just used the chipped sapphire to fill most of it in. But now I'm just going in gently with my black soot, just refilling some of those sections in and really kind of darkening around the edges and into some of those colors as well, but kind of keeping a lighter hand on the black soot at first. And now we're going to bring in that black soot a bit more, but then I'll bring in the colors over the top. Now you will get a little bit of touching of other colors like the chipped sapphire and the black soot. So I've just grabbed a piece of scrap paper and I'm just cleaning my sponge off before actually adding it to my pad again, so that you're not going to be transferring any dark color. Now, a couple of times I did forget, but overall I didn't get too much of a cross-contamination with my colours in doing this. So I'm just going to be keeping on working between the colours and now going in again with the chipped sapphire now that I've added the extra colouring with the other three lighter blues. And then we'll go in with our black soot, give that another coverage. So just going light of hand with this, I'm not pressing too much. And I'm just going to go back and forth until we get a nice kind of even blend between all of these colors. So I'm just swapping out because I've only got three Ranger handles. So I'm just going to swap in between my sponges and just adding a little bit extra of the Salvaged Pattina and Peacock feathers. And then we'll swap it out once I've just added that broken china. And then go in again with that black soot, and my little top didn't want to stick on then, and just finally do a final blend out with that. So you can see this is our base layer, but now the magic's going to start by just adding, initially I'm just adding some Distress Oxide sprayer just to give like a kind of white shimmer look at the back. Then I'm going to also add some Avery Elle Shimmer spray. And I did get a couple of bigger dollops here and there, but I just grabbed a bit of paper towel and just dabbed them off and just took off any excess of that shimmer spray. But it just creates such a beautiful shine to our card base. Now the last thing that I'm going to do is just add a bit of white acrylic paint to a block and just add some water to it. Give that a good swish around. Now I did get a lot of paint caught up at the top of my brush, so just make sure you add enough water when you're doing this to make sure you get a nice tap off when you are tapping it onto your panel. So you can see there I added more water and now I'm getting a much better tap off of that white acrylic paint onto our card base. You can see there I just got a little bit of splatter, but you can just say that's a shooting star. Now just using a stitch rectangle die, I'll just run that panel through our die cutting machine. And now referencing that photo, it is kind of a white and grey looking stone underneath them. So I'm just using some white cardstock and some Hickory Smoke Distress Oxide and just lightening my hand as I go into the middle of that white cardstock, just adding a little bit of that around the outside. Now just using some Ranger texture paste, I'm just going to use my finger and just smear that all over the top of that die, mountain die, just to get a bit of texture there. And then I also want to add some shine to match in with Falkor and also our background. So grab some Lawn Fawn Sparkle Glaze and just put a little bit on my glass top. Just going to mix that through that texture paste just to add a bit of sparkle. And just to create the texture of the stone, I'm just going to dab my finger all over that. And it just gets this nice kind of textured look to our little mountain. So I'll give you a quick look and we'll set that aside to dry and we'll clean up our fingers and our desktop. Now because Falkor is quite a light kind of creamy white color, I'm only going to be very light-handed when I'm doing my coloring. So I'm just starting initially with my lightest marker, my W00, and just working out where I want all my shadows to be. So where everything will be casting a shadow, so kind of where his face is down on that left-hand side, will create a shadow there. And also at the back and underneath him will be in shadow as well. So now I'm going in with my darkest marker to put my shadows in, which is my W4. So I'm only putting a very small amount of this in. I do want some contrast and some shadows, but we don't want too much because we do want him to look like a kind of creamy white creature. So I'm just doing very light-handed with this W4 and popping all our shadows in underneath where they're thrown from his legs. Also underneath that back foot and where this will be in shadow as that folds around behind him. And don't forget that little foot down the bottom, which I do forget. So now I'm just putting a little bit of texture to those ears. And then we'll bring in our W2 marker to blend that out. Again, I'm not using a lot of this, but just enough to blend this and soften that edge of our W4 marker. And we're just using little flicking motions to bring it out into our white cardstock. Go to that back foot and underneath his belly. And then I remember I missed his little front foot here, so I'm just bringing that W4 back in, and also where his little toes flick up, and bring that W2 back to finish off our blending out of the W4. Flick out from where those little fur lines are that are drawn in by the artist, and flicking up where his ears are. Forgot those little bits of fur on his chest. And then we'll bring in our E41 to blend out our W2, just slowly working into our white space. And go down that back and just kind of curve that around slightly. Flicking out because this back section will be mostly in shadow because it just curves around behind him. Flicking up into our cardstock. And we won't forget that tail. Flicking out from where those little hairs are, and the same with his ears. To finish off with his face, and then we'll bring in our E40 to blend out our E41. Again, just slowly flicking that out, coming into our white cardstock, nearly fully covering that back section. Flicking out from his face and underneath that belly. Most of that back foot will be in shadow. as will that underneath of his belly, and then up to the base of that tail. And then we'll bring our, oh, I forgot a little bit, sorry, I forgot to flick out his ears with the E40. Then we'll bring in our lightest color again to do a blend out as much as we can into that white space, but we're still going to leave some white space so that it shows that he is, you know, a white or off-white creature. So just flicking nicely, filling in those last bits of the feet, but keeping most of that section of his main body white. And we'll now finish off his little mustache. So going through those markers again, the W4 through to the W2. Don't forget his lip, which matches in the same color. Blend that out with the E41 and then the E40. And our final color, the, oh, sorry, I will give it another coat with the W4 to make sure we've got those little strands of hair flicking out. E41 next. And then we'll just color up his little teeth. So just a C3 to show the shadow and a C0 to blend that out. And then I just want to add a little bit of shadowing to that little back spine, just with the two colors. So for his tongue, I'm just going to do a light glaze of E04 and then blend that out with the R21. And now we'll finish off with his eyes. So I'm just going to do in the picture, he's got nice beautiful brown eyes. So I started with the E29, blended that out with the E27, E23, and now finish with the E21. And then we'll just add his black pupils. So I'm just using W8 to fill that out. Just getting a nice little round mark there. And just to put some catch lights in, just to give him a bit of life, just going to use a Jelly Roll 08 pen. Just throw in a couple of little dots, so one bigger one and then one smaller one. And that's the image all colored, and I have now cut him out with my Brother Scan and Cut. So I'm just going to be popping some of this Nuvo Aqua Shimmer. I always like to put a little bit on my glass mat and then use the pen to put it on, just to make sure I'm not going to get too much onto my image. So we're only wanting just that little bit that goes down his back as it appears in that picture. Now I've done two of these mountains because it didn't quite fit down the bottom, and we're not going to use all of it, but we will use most of it. But I will just cut one in half because I want two kind of just tucked on either side to fill out that base. So I'm just going to grab out my tonic trimmer and just trim one in half. Doesn't matter if it's perfectly in half because these are going to be stuck behind the main mountain panel. So now I'll just grab some glue and just work out where I'm going to want them to sit. And just pop them to either side and then just work out where this one will sit over the top. So then we'll just add a little bit of glue on either side of these pieces, and then I will also put a little bit on the back of our mountain die just to make sure we've got enough coverage to make this stick. So I do realize that I need to put a little bit on the sides of this one as well. I know how much to put on. So we'll just line that up as best we can and just secure that down. Give that a good press, and I might just set that aside underneath something heavy to dry. So now that's dry, I'm just going to line it up with our front panel and work out where I want to run this through the die cutting machine, because I want to use the same stitch rectangle die so that it matches in with our background panel. So now I've run that through my die cutting machine, and now I'm going to just use some double-sided adhesive, which I'll just burnish down to make sure it's easier to peel off the backing paper. And now that that's done, I'm just going to line this up really easy to just line up one corner, especially with those stitching lines to our background panel. So I thought the Lawn Fawn Out of This World stamp set would be perfect for this sentiment. So as always, I've grabbed a piece of black cardstock to do some white heat embossing. Pop that in my Misti and just lining up these two parts of the sentiment. So I'm going to do two separate sentiment strips. Just prep that up with some anti-static powder tool. And just using my Versamark Watermark Ink, just give that a stamp. grab my folded piece of A4 printer paper to catch my excess white heat embossing powder, and I'll preheat my heat tool, go into the back first, and then just come to the top to get that all nice and melted. So once that's all done, we'll just set that aside to dry. And once that's dry, we'll just use our little cloth to wipe up the excess anti-static powder. And now we're just going to trim these down using our atomic trimmer to make some sentiment strips. I'm just lining it up with my grid mark, so I'm going with the longer sentiment first just to get that cut down to size, just keeping it even on all sides. And then we'll do the same with our out of this world, just trimming either end to match. And then we'll just line up with that grid line to get our little tops and bottoms cut evenly. So just making sure I've got that lined up with the correct one. And now we've got our 2 sentiment strips and all our essentials for our card ready to go. So I've cut and scored a black card base, and now I'm just going to glue our little background panel straight onto our card base, just leaving a black border all the way around. Now I also decided I want to cut out this little white portion in the center of our image. So I like to always kind of just do a rough line where I want to cut, because I just find it easier to follow a line to match him with the white line that's around him. And just using my Friska's knife, I'm just going to cut that hole, and then we'll get some foam tape just strategically placed all around Falkor, just to make sure he's nice and supported once he goes onto our background panel. Just making sure we've got enough to support his body, and then don't forget his tail and the feet. So now I'll just put a couple of small little pieces on his little feet. And then for our little sentiment strips, I'm just going to use some black squares to match him with the black cardstock. And we'll get some little squares popped on the back. So I'm going to put 4, just roughly placed out evenly along this, just making sure that they're straight, because I'm a bit anal that way. And then we'll do the same, but because this is a little bit wider, I'm going to put some down the bottom, some at the top, just to make sure it's supported evenly all the way along. I've now taken off all the backing paper. There was a bit of cat fur on him, so I'm just going to line that up and give him a good press down. Now I've got him where I want him. I'm just going to place out these sentiment strips, just using my reversible tweezers to help me line everything up. And they're on nice and straight. And this is the finished card for this tutorial. Falkor is so gorgeous. I just think Elvi Studio just creates these most wonderful characters, especially coming from iconic characters like this from the NeverEnding Story. I hope you've enjoyed this card making tutorial. If you have, please hit the like button. And if you'd like to see any future videos, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye.